I stood before the large mirror adjusting my tie, checking every crease on my dress shirt. Today was an important day, the annual meeting of Bennett and Company, the wine and agricultural real estate conglomerate my family had built over 3 generations. The air this morning felt different, like a cold breeze passing through despite the radiant sun outside. I told myself it was probably just baseless anxiety. My father, Kazan Bennett, had called me in early saying there would be a significant announcement. I assumed it was about the plan to expand into the European market, a project I had poured my heart into for the past 2 years. But deep down, an unnamed premonition made my heart beat faster than usual. The grand boardroom at Bennett and Company's headquarters was on the top floor with massive glass windows overlooking Napa Valley, where endless vineyards stretched into the distance. The polished walnut conference table, luxurious leather chairs, and light from the crystal chandelier gave the room an air of authority. I walked in, smiling at the shareholders already seated. They responded with polite nods, but I noticed a few averted gazes. Something was off. I pulled out my chair and sat in my familiar spot, right beside my father where I had sat for the past 10 years as the chief operating officer. My father, Kazan Bennett, entered with his usual commanding presence, his silver hair neatly combed, his navy suit perfectly tailored. Following him was Veronica, my stepmother, in a form-fitting wine-red dress, her smile sharp. Beside her was Benson, her son from a previous marriage, my stepbrother. Benson always had a way of making me uneasy, from his smirking half-smile to the way he tilted his head as if challenging everyone around him. "Good morning, everyone," my father began, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the murmurs in the room. "Thank you all for being here today. This is a special day not only for Bennett and Company, but for our family as well." I smiled, nodding slightly. Special. The word made me think of great victories, like when we secured a contract with a 5-star hotel chain in New York, or when I convinced an Italian partner to import our wines. I had worked tirelessly for 10 years to pull the company back from the brink of bankruptcy to its leading position in Napa. I looked at my father, expecting him to mention the European project or perhaps offer a rare word of praise for me. But then, he continued, each sentence hitting like an unexpected blow. "Today, I want to announce a significant decision. After many years of dedication, I've decided to retire early. It's time for the next generation to take over, bringing a modern vision to Bennett and Company." The room fell silent. I felt time itself freeze. Early retirement? My father was only 60, still full of energy, still gracing the covers of business magazines as a symbol of resilience. I stared at him, searching for a sign that this was a joke, but his eyes avoided mine, shifting toward Benson. "And I'm proud to announce," he continued, his voice rising slightly, "that Benson, my son, will assume the role of Chief Operating Officer starting next month." The world seemed to collapse beneath my feet. Benson as CEO? Benson who had never worked a serious day in his life? Benson who only knew how to spend money on expensive cars and all-night parties? I turned to look at him. Benson was smiling, a smug, self-satisfied grin as if he'd known this was coming all along. Veronica clapped first, her pale hands striking together like a triumphant symphony. The other shareholders joined in sporadically, but I could see the awkwardness on their faces. "Fabian," my father called my name, his tone softer but laced with unease. "You will transition to the role of strategic advisor, supporting Benson during this transition period." Strategic advisor. Those 4 words echoed in my mind like a sentence. Not co-director, not vice president, but advisor. A position with no power, no prestige. My breathing grew heavy as if the air in the room had suddenly thickened. I looked at my father, hoping he'd say something, anything to explain why he was doing this. But he looked at Benson and smiled with proud eyes. Veronica spoke up, her voice smooth as velvet but sharp as shattered glass. "I believe this is the right decision for the future of Bennett and Company. Benson brings freshness and flexibility that the company needs to reach further." I stood, my legs trembling, but I forced myself to stay steady. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "Congratulations, Benson," I said, looking straight into his eyes. But in my gaze, I knew he saw something. Not congratulations, but disappointment, the smoldering fire burning in my chest. "Thank you, Fabian," Benson replied, his voice smooth and condescending. "You've always been a great example to learn from. I look forward to working with you in your new role." New role? His words were another stab. I wanted to shout, to slam my hand on the table and ask my father why. Why had he betrayed his promise? 10 years ago, in this very room, he had told me I would be his successor, that I was the future of Bennett and Company. But now it was all a lie. I turned to my father, my voice low, trembling slightly. "Are you sure about this decision, Father?" He looked up, but his eyes avoided mine, gazing somewhere over my shoulder. "Fabian, everything is for the company's growth. And for the family." Family. The word made me want to laugh, but my throat tightened. Family? The family he meant was Veronica and Benson, not me. I felt my heart being squeezed, but I wouldn't let myself appear weak. Not here, not in front of them. "Yes, Father," I said, my voice flat. "I understand." I turned and walked out of the boardroom. I heard the murmurs behind me, the whispers of the shareholders, but no one dared speak up. They knew what had just happened. They knew I had just been stripped of everything. My office was at the end of the hallway where I had spent thousands of hours working, dreaming. I pushed the door open and slammed it shut behind me. The familiar space, my oak desk, bookshelves filled with documents, and the nameplate reading Fabian Bennett, Executive Director, neatly placed on the desk. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the engraved gold lettering. 10 years. 10 years I had lived for this nameplate, this name, this legacy. I removed the nameplate and placed it in a drawer. The sound of metal against wood was sharp, like a farewell. I walked to the window and looked out. The Bennett and Company logo glowed brightly on the building, a symbol of success. But now it only made me feel empty. 10 years of effort, 10 years of sacrifice, all pushed aside in a matter of minutes. In my mind, a single thought repeated like a mournful song that wouldn't stop. What did I do wrong? I had no answer. But I knew one thing. This wasn't the end. Not for me. I sat down in the chair, the familiar leather seat from my earliest days back in Napa Valley. At 33, I felt as though I had already lived an entire lifetime. 10 years ago, I stood at a crossroads. A job offer from a major corporation in New York, with a salary that would have ensured a comfortable life, or a call from my father to return and save Bennett and Company, our family business teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. I chose family, not for money, not for fame, but for honor. The honor of the Bennett name of my grandfather Noah, who planted the first grapevines on this land. I opened the desk drawer and pulled out an old framed photo. It was a picture of me and my father taken 10 years ago when I had just graduated with my MBA. In the photo, he was smiling, his hand resting on my shoulder, his eyes brimming with pride. "You are the future of Bennett and Company, Fabian," he had said, right here in this room. I believed him. But now, looking back, I saw only my own naivety. For the past 10 years, I had worked over 14 hours a day, leading major projects, from building a new winery to securing contracts with major hotel chains. I remembered those early months when the company was drowning in debt. I flew back and forth between California and New York, convincing investors and banks to believe that Bennett and Company was still worth saving. And we did it. From a failing business, I brought it to record profits, transforming the Bennett name into a symbol of premium wine in Napa Valley. I stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the vineyards stretching under the glow of the sunset. Napa Valley, where I was born and raised, where I once thought I would call home forever. But now, I felt like a stranger in my own house. My father, Cason Bennett, was the one who pushed me out of its center. At 60, he still maintained the polished veneer of a corporate chairman, but I knew better than anyone. He wasn't a leader. He preferred wine-soaked galas to strategy meetings, flattery to hard numbers. Veronica, my stepmother, was a different story. She entered my father's life like a storm, with her glamorous appearance and the sharp cunning of someone who had once been a PR director for a major brand. At 54, she still exuded the charm of high society, but I always sensed a coldness in her eyes. Veronica never openly opposed me, but I knew she had manipulated my father, subtly planting the idea in his mind that I was too rigid, that I lacked the flexibility to lead. I tried to ignore it, believing that as long as I did my job well, I would prove my worth. But I was wrong. And then there was Benson, my stepbrother, Veronica's son from a previous marriage. Only a year younger than me, we were worlds apart. Benson grew up spoiled by our father, living extravagantly, always showing off. His education was mediocre, and he never worked seriously at the company until Veronica pushed our father to bring him onto the board. I still remembered the times Benson would pat my shoulder, calling me big brother with a friendly smile. But I saw the envy in his eyes, the jealousy of what I had achieved. I tried to see him as family, but now, after today's meeting, I realized he had never seen me as a brother. I sat back down, my hands cradling my head, trying to piece together the fragments of my thoughts. 10 years I had sacrificed everything. I missed birthdays, vacations, chances to live a normal life. I worked myself to exhaustion, falling asleep at my desk, waking up to cold cups of coffee. I saved the company, pulling it from the brink to build an empire. But all I got in return was a strategic advisor role and a declaration that Benson, who had never shed a drop of sweat for the company, was the future. 3 months have passed since that fateful meeting, and Bennett & Company is no longer the company I once knew. Benson, in his new role as CEO, has turned the place into his personal playground. I still remember the day he strode into the boardroom dressed in a pristine suit, a smug smile on his lips, declaring he would usher the company into a new era. I tried to stay calm, tried to believe he might do something worthwhile. But now, seeing the changes he's brought, I only see a cascade of mistakes, like dominoes toppling one after another. Benson moved fast, recklessly fast. Within weeks, he replaced a slew of directors loyal to me with younger faces, people he called his modern team. They were his friends from lavish parties, people who had never set foot in a vineyard or understood the value of a bottle of wine crafted with heart and soul. I vividly recall the day Mark, our veteran production manager who had worked with me for 8 years, walked into my office, his face pale. "Fabian, I've been replaced," he said, his voice trembling with anger and helplessness. "Benson says I don't fit his new vision." All I could do was grip his hand and apologize, though I knew deep down he wasn't at fault. But that feeling of powerlessness, knowing I couldn't change a thing, was suffocating. Benson didn't stop at personnel changes. He poured money into high-risk real estate ventures, luxury resorts in obscure locations. "We need to expand quickly, Fabian," he once said during a meeting, his tone condescending as if I were some outdated relic. "The era of traditional wine is over. We need to chase trends." I tried to warn him, sitting him down with numbers and charts, explaining that the real estate market was unstable, that cutting costs on traditional wine production to pivot to industrial lines would destroy our reputation. But every time I spoke up, Benson would just smile, pat my shoulder and say, "Fabian, you're too conservative. Leave it to me." Or worse, he'd turn to his new directors and say, "Let's note Fabian's input for consideration." I knew those words were just a polite way to brush me aside. My father, Kason Bennett, hurt me the most. After retiring, he completely withdrew from the company, handing full control to Benson. He spent his days traveling with Veronica, attending extravagant parties in Paris and Dubai, living the peaceful retirement she spoke of. I tried to reach him, phone calls, texts, even driving to his sprawling house on the outskirts of Napa. But every time I brought up the company's state, he brushed me off. "Benson will handle it, Fabian. Focus on your role." When I pressed that Benson was leading the company to ruin, he merely shrugged and said, "Son, don't be so serious. Benson needs time to learn." I wanted to scream in his face that Benson wasn't learning, that he was destroying everything I'd built. But I stayed silent because his indifferent gaze told me I had been cast out of my own legacy. One late evening, I sat alone in my office, the light from my laptop screen casting shadows on my face. The revenue spreadsheet before me was a sea of red, like blood seeping from the company's wounds. I could do nothing, couldn't stop Benson, couldn't make my father see. I felt like a caged animal roaring but unheard. I looked up at the photo on my desk, a picture of my grandfather, Noah Bennett, standing in a vineyard, a radiant smile on his face. He was the one who taught me everything, from tending grapevines to upholding honor. "If you were still alive," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you wouldn't recognize this company anymore." The photo of my grandfather brought my grandmother, Renly Bennett, to mind, the only person who still believed in me. She lived alone on the outskirts of Napa in a small wooden house nestled among old vineyards. She was the last link to the family's past, to the days when Bennett and Company wasn't just a company but a dream, a legacy. I hadn't visited her since that fateful meeting, too ashamed to face her, ashamed that I'd let their legacy fall into Benson's hands. But tonight I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed her, her comfort, a place where I could breathe without feeling suffocated. I stood, shut off my laptop, and grabbed my car keys. As I left the office, I glanced back one last time. This room, once the center of my world, was now just an empty shell. I closed the door and stepped outside, the cold Napa night wrapping around me like a harsh embrace. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind the glowing Bennett and Company logo, once my pride, now just a painful memory. The road to my grandmother Renly's house wound through the old vineyards, where the silvery moonlight bathed the rows of vines in a serene, painterly glow. But inside me, everything churned like a storm. I slowed the car, letting the scent of earth and grapes drift through the open window, searching for a shred of peace amidst the fragments of my broken spirit. Bennett and Company, the company I'd poured my youth into building, was unraveling under Benson's hands, and my father, the person I once trusted most, had turned his back on me. I felt like a lost soul, no longer sure who I was or what I was fighting for. My grandmother's small wooden house came into view, nestled among the old vineyards where my grandfather Noah had planted the family's first grapevines. A warm, golden light spilled from the window, gentle and inviting, in stark contrast to the chaos within me. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat still for a moment, staring at the familiar wooden door. How many times as a child had I run through that door, throwing myself into my grandmother's arms, listening to her stories about my grandfather and their love for this land. I was no longer that boy, but I needed her now more than ever. I needed a place to unburden my pain, to find the hope I'd lost. I stepped out of the car, my shoes crunching on the gravel path leading to the house. The cool night breeze carried the scent of ripe grapes and decaying wood, stirring memories of childhood. I knocked on the door, 3 soft taps, and waited. A moment later it opened, and there stood my grandmother Renly, her small, frail figure slighter than I remembered. She was over 80 now, her white hair neatly pinned up, her gnarled hands trembling as they gripped the doorframe. But her eyes, oh, those eyes still sparkled with the same warmth they held when I was a child, as if nothing in the world could extinguish the fire within her. "Fabian," she said, her voice soft but brimming with love. She gave me a gentle smile, the kind that made it feel like the world stopped spinning. "Come in, my boy." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. The house was unchanged, the smell of old wood, a faint hint of wine, and family photos lining the walls. A small fireplace crackled, casting light across her face. I noticed how much thinner she'd become, her steps slow and careful, steadying herself against a chair. My heart tightened. I knew she'd been frail for years, reliant on heart medication, but seeing her now, I truly felt the fragility of time. Yet she still tended the small garden behind the house, still crafted her own wine by hand, what she called the last soul of Bennett and Company. I wanted to say something, to apologize for not visiting more often, but my throat closed up. She led me to the kitchen where a kettle simmered on the stove. "Sit, dear," she said gently. She poured tea into 2 old ceramic mugs and slid one toward me. I held it, the warmth seeping into my palms, but it wasn't enough to dispel the coldness in my heart. We sat across from each other, silent for a moment, the crackling fire and the soft whistle of the wind outside the only sounds. I knew she was waiting for me to speak, but I didn't know where to begin. How could I tell her that my dreams had shattered, that my grandfather's legacy was being destroyed, that my own family had betrayed me? Finally, I took a deep breath, and the words spilled out like a river breaking through a dam. "Grandma," I began, my voice trembling, "Bennett and Company isn't ours anymore. Benson, he's ruining everything. He's changed it all. Staff, strategies. He doesn't care about quality or tradition. Dad handed everything to him and won't listen to me. I've tried, Grandma, I've tried to warn them, but no one listens. I feel pushed out like the 10 years I gave mean nothing." She sat there listening, her frail hands clasped tightly on the table. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just looked at me with sad but understanding eyes. I went on, my voice breaking further. "I'm tired, Grandma. I've sacrificed everything. Love, time, my own dreams, to save the company, but now I have no drive left. I feel like I've lived for nothing, like everything I did was just to be betrayed." I stopped, bowing my head, feeling hot tears welling in my eyes. I didn't want to cry, didn't want to seem weak in front of her, but I couldn't hold it back anymore. The pain, disappointment, and helplessness of the past 3 months crashed over me like a wave. I covered my face, trying to hide the tears, but my shoulders shook with each sob. She stood quietly and came to my side. I felt her bony hand rest on my shoulder, gentle but firm. "Fabian," she said, her voice soft as a lullaby, "you haven't lived for nothing. You're being tested to understand your true worth." I looked up into her eyes. Despite the weariness of age, they shone with fierce conviction. "Grandma," I whispered, "I don't know what worth I have left. I've lost everything, the company, my position, my trust in Dad." She took my hand, her cold yet strangely warm fingers enveloping mine. "You haven't lost everything," she said firmly. "You still have yourself, Fabian. And that's the most important thing. The company, the titles, they're temporary. But you carry the spirit of your grandfather, of this family. That you can never lose." Her words pierced the darkness in my heart like a ray of light. I gripped her hand, feeling the faint warmth of her frail fingers. "But what do I do, Grandma?" I asked, my voice desperate. "I can't just watch them destroy Grandpa's legacy." She smiled, a sad but meaningful smile. "You don't need to save the company, Fabian. You need to save yourself. Find your own path and don't let those who aren't worthy define your value." We sat there in the small kitchen, talking late into the night. She told me stories of the early days when she and Grandpa built Bennett and Company, of the hardships they overcame. "Your grandfather used to say," she recounted, "that a good vine needs not just good soil but someone who loves it. You're that person, Fabian. Not Benson, not your father, but you." As the clock neared midnight, I saw she was tired. I helped her to her room, fetching her heart medication from the bedside cabinet. Her hands trembled as she took it, and a vague fear crept into my heart. She was so frail, and the thought of losing her sent a shiver through me. I sat by her bedside, watching as she lay down, her silver hair fanning across the pillow like a halo. Before I left, she took my hand again. "Fabian," she whispered, her voice faint, "if one day I'm gone, keep walking your path. Don't look back at the past. Promise me." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I hugged her, feeling the warmth of her fragile body, the faint scent of wine like a living memory. It was the smell of simpler days, when I believed I could do anything. I kissed her forehead and whispered, "I promise, Grandma." When I stepped out of the house, the night was deep. I lingered by the car, watching the golden light from the window fade. Her words echoed in my mind like a premonition that tightened my chest. I knew she was preparing me for something, but I didn't want to think about it. Not now. I got in the car, started the engine, and drove away, carrying her warmth and my promise, not for the company, not for my father, but for myself and for her. The months that followed were a suffocating blur. My new office, a cramped corner on a lower floor of Bennett & Company's headquarters, became an invisible prison. The atmosphere in the company was taut as a bowstring, every meeting and hallway filled with averted glances and hushed whispers. Revenue plummeted, major partners began pulling out, and the remaining veteran employees left quietly. I watched the company, my grandfather's legacy, crumble day by day, powerless to stop it. I tried writing reports, sending emails, speaking directly to Benson, but it was like pouring water on a duck's back. He didn't need my advice. He wanted me gone. Then on my 35th birthday, a day I'd hoped would pass quietly, everything collapsed. I was summoned to the executive boardroom, the room where I once led grand strategies, now Benson's domain. When I walked in, he was seated at the head of the table, a small silver-wrapped gift box beside him, a smug smile stretching across his face. The other directors sat in silence, their eyes avoiding mine as if they knew what was coming. My stomach churned, a foreboding tightness gripping my chest. "Fabian, have a seat," Benson said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's a special day, isn't it? Your birthday." He pushed the gift box toward me, his eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "A little something from the company." I stared at the box but didn't touch it. "What do you want, Benson?" I asked, my voice cold, masking the trembling within. He laughed, a laugh that made me want to punch him. "Relax, Fabian. Just a small change." He paused, glancing around the room to ensure all eyes were on him, then continued. "The board met and we've decided the strategic advisor role is no longer suitable. You've done well, Fabian, but we need a newer team. So effective today, your contract is terminated." The room seemed to hold its breath. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice, as if time itself had stopped. Fired. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and merciless. I looked at Benson, at his smug grin, and I understood. This wasn't a business decision. It was a meticulously planned act of revenge. He wanted to erase me, not just from the company, but from the Bennett family legacy. I said nothing. I couldn't. I stood, pushed the gift box back toward him, and walked out. The sound of my shoes on the wooden floor rang out, each step like a hammer blow to my pride. I heard whispers behind me, but no one dared call me back. I walked through the hallway, past the paintings depicting Bennett & Company's history, and into my office for the last time. I didn't take much, just a file folder and the old watch my grandfather Noah had given me, the only thing still tying me to those bygone days. As I left the building, the glow of the Bennett & Company logo bathed my face, a bitter farewell. That evening, I drove to my father's house, the sprawling estate on the outskirts of Napa where he lived with Veronica. I didn't know what I expected, an explanation, a defense, or just a shred of comfort from the father I once idolized. When I entered the living room, he was seated in an armchair, a glass of wine in hand. Veronica standing beside him, her eyes as cold as ever. "Fabian," he said evenly, "you're late. We're about to head out for dinner." I didn't mince words. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with restraint, "Benson just fired me. He's kicked me out of the company, out of the family legacy. Did you know about this?" He looked at me, but his eyes were empty, as if I were a stranger. "Fabian, you need to respect Benson's decisions. He's the CEO. He has the right to do what's best for the company," and it felt like a slap in the face. "Best for the company?" I nearly shouted. "He's destroying everything. Revenue is tanking, employees are leaving, partners are pulling out. Don't you see? I spent 10 years saving this company, and now you're telling me to respect him?" Veronica cut in, her voice smooth but sharp. "Fabian, you're being too emotional. Benson is doing what's necessary to modernize the company. You should accept it and move on." I looked at my father, waiting for him to say something, anything, to show he still saw me as his son. But he just shrugged and said, "Listen to your mother, Fabian. Don't make things complicated." Your mother. Those words were the final knife. I turned and left the house without looking back. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel, tears streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. Let the pain sink in, let it remind me that my own family had betrayed me. A few days later, still reeling from the shock, a phone call stopped my heart. It was Mary, my grandmother, Renly's neighbor. "Fabian," her voice trembled over the line, "your grandmother. She passed away. In her sleep this morning." I don't remember what I said, only that I hung up, got in the car, and drove like a madman to the small wooden house on the outskirts of Napa. Rain poured down, pounding the windshield, mingling with the tears I could no longer hold back. When I arrived, an ambulance was parked in the yard, its red lights flashing through the rain. I ran inside, pushing open the door, and found the doctor and nurse in the living room, their faces heavy with regret. "She went peacefully," the doctor said, but his words were just an echo in my head. I knelt beside her bed where she lay, eyes closed, her face serene as if sleeping. I took her hand, cold and still, and felt my world collapse. Renly, the only person who believed in me, who gave me hope in my darkest days, was gone forever. I held her, whispering, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry I didn't visit more." I called my father, my voice breaking. "Grandma's gone," I said. He was silent for a moment, then replied, "Handle the funeral arrangements, Fabian. Veronica and I will come later." No comfort, no emotion. I hung up, feeling erased from this family. The funeral took place 4 days later, simple as she had lived. Only a few close neighbors attended, people who had tasted her homemade wine, who had heard her stories of the old days. My father and Veronica arrived late, dressed in elegant black, their eyes cold and perfunctory. They stood, offered brief condolences, and left early. I stood by her grave, staring at the headstone engraved with Renly Bennett, feeling like I'd lost the last piece of my family. A few days later, I met with the family lawyer, hoping she'd left a will, some trace I could cling to. But he shook his head, his voice sympathetic. "No formal will, Fabian. By law, Renly's estate, the vineyard, the house, goes to your father, Kazan Bennett." I was stunned, as if the ground had caved beneath me. The vineyard where my grandparents planted the first vines, the heart of Bennett and Company's soul, now belonged to my father, a man who no longer understood its value. I stood before that vineyard, rain soaking my clothes. I had lost my job, my grandmother, and now the family's memories. I felt like a ghost, erased from the Bennett lineage. No company, no family, no place to stand. I stood there in the rain, clutching my grandfather's watch, and wondered, what do I have left? The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I left central Napa and moved to a small apartment on the outskirts, a place with 4 bare walls and a creaky old bed. It had no windows overlooking the valley, no scent of ripe grapes or the vibrant light of Napa Valley. It was a place to exist, not to live. I cut off contact with my father, Veronica, and Benson. My phone sat silent, no longer buzzing with calls from colleagues or partners. I had once been Fabian Bennett, Chief Operating Officer of Bennett and Company, but now I was just a name no one remembered. Despite my MBA and 10 years of experience, finding a new job proved harder than I'd imagined. The wine companies in Napa knew me, but they also knew about the Bennett family drama. Some expressed pity, others steered clear, wary of the trouble I might bring. I took on small consulting gigs, market analysis for local wineries, but the pay was meager, barely enough to cover rent and food. Some days I had to sell personal items, a watch, an old suit, just to get by. Each time I opened my wallet, I felt my self-respect erode bit by bit. But what hurt most wasn't the financial struggle. It was the sense of losing myself. Every day I drove past my grandmother's old vineyard, now owned by my father. I'd pull over by the roadside, staring through the fence at the vines standing resiliently just as she had lived. I remembered her words, "Don't look back at the past." But the past was all I had. I clutched my grandfather's watch, the last relic of those bygone days, and wondered if I had the strength to go on. My 36th birthday arrived quietly. I woke in the silent apartment, dim light filtering through thin curtains. No cake, no well wishes, not even a decent cup of coffee. I planned to repeat the usual routine, sitting at my laptop searching for new projects, trying not to dwell on what I'd lost. But a knock at the door shattered the stillness. I opened it to find a courier holding a white envelope with my name, Fabian Bennett, written in elegant handwriting. I opened the envelope, my heart pounding as I read the contents. It was an invitation from the office of Edward Collins, the lawyer who had handled my grandmother Renly's personal affairs. Per the instructions of Mrs. Renly Bennett, the letter read, we are authorized to contact you on your 36th birthday. Please visit our office at 10 a.m. today. I stood there clutching the envelope, a mix of confusion and hope swirling within me. My grandmother, what had she left for me? I didn't dare hope too much, afraid it would turn to disappointment, but I grabbed my coat, took my car keys, and drove to the lawyer's office, my heart hammering in my chest. Edward Collins' office was in central Napa, a small but elegant building with large windows overlooking the street. When I walked in, Mr. Collins, a man in his 60s with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, stood to greet me. Fabian, he said warmly, you're right on time. Please sit. I sat, my hands trembling on my lap. He pulled a sealed envelope and a thick file from his drawer, placing them before me. Your grandmother prepared these years ago, he said, his eyes meaningful. She called it her contingency plan if things went off course. She knew you'd need this, Fabian. My throat tightened as I looked at the envelope. I broke the seal and pulled out a legal document, my heart nearly stopping as I read the words. It was a trust fund in my name, valued at $5 million to be activated on my 36th birthday. $5 million. The figure stunned me. But what made me tremble was the handwritten letter attached in Renly's familiar slanted script, the same writing I'd seen on childhood birthday cards. I held the letter, took a deep breath, and began to read. My dearest Fabian, if you're reading this, things haven't gone as you hoped. I know you've sacrificed so much given your youth to protect the family legacy. But my boy, the true legacy isn't in the company or in money. It's in you, in your heart and spirit. I created this trust not for you to seek revenge or reclaim what's lost, but to build a new path, your own path. Trust in yourself as I've always trusted in you. Don't let the past cage you. Live, Fabian, and live well. Love, Grandma Renly Starr. Tears spilled onto the paper, blurring the ink. I bowed my head, shoulders shaking, unable to hold back. She had known. She had foreseen it all. My father's betrayal, Benson's hostility, my downfall. And with her wisdom and unconditional love, she'd given me a chance to start anew. I clutched the letter, feeling as if she were here, holding my hand, telling me I still had worth, still had hope. Mr. Collins sat quietly, giving me time with my emotions. Finally, he spoke. Renly was an extraordinary woman, Fabian. She always said you were the family's hope. This was her way of ensuring you wouldn't be left behind. I nodded, managing only a thank you. I left the office carrying the envelope and letter, a spark igniting within me. For the first time in months, I felt I could breathe, could dream, could live again. That afternoon, I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother rested. Her grave lay beneath a large oak, her headstone glinting in the sunlight. I knelt, placing the letter on the stone, and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I promise I won't let you down." I stood gazing at the sky, a new energy coursing through me. The $5 million wasn't just money. It was trust, love, Renly's true legacy. I would use it to rebuild, not for revenge, but to prove I was Fabian Bennett, and I would never give up. I began with a new dream. Bennett Vineworks, an organic winery focused on sustainable farming and exceptional quality. I leased an old production facility on the outskirts of Napa Valley, a modest, weathered place with peeling brick walls and a rusted tin roof. It wasn't glamorous like Bennett and Company's headquarters, but I didn't need glamour. I needed a place to start over. I called a few old friends, veteran employees who had worked with me at Bennett and Company, and left because they couldn't stomach Benson's management style. They came, not for the money, but for their faith in me. Fabian, Mark, the former production manager, said as he stepped into the facility, "If you can do this, we'll follow you to the end." I combined new technology with the traditional winemaking methods my grandfather Noah had taught me. I wanted every bottle of Bennett Vineworks to carry the soul of those first vines, the love my grandparents had poured into this land. My goal wasn't just to compete with Bennett and Company, but to restore the true meaning of the Bennett name, a legacy of quality, integrity, and dedication. But reality was harsher than I'd imagined. Starting from scratch was a battle. I had to secure production permits, find suppliers, and build a distribution network, all with a brand name the market had never heard of. Even with the $5 million, I quickly learned that money couldn't buy trust. Major suppliers in Napa were tied to Bennett and Company, and they hesitated to work with me. "Fabian, you know how it is," an old supplier said, his eyes apologetic but resolute. "We don't want trouble with Benson." I didn't blame them. Benson, with the power and wealth of Bennett and Company, was a force not easily challenged. Meanwhile, Benson began to notice my presence. Under his leadership, Bennett and Company continued its downward spiral, and the emergence of Bennett Vineworks was like a thorn in his side. I heard rumors that Benson was using his influence to block my path. One morning, I got a call from a small distributor who had agreed to work with me. "Fabian," he said, his voice tense, "I'm sorry, but I have to back out. Bennett and Company threatened to cut our contract if I deal with you." I gripped the phone, feeling a surge of anger, but it was only the beginning. Benson didn't stop at unofficial threats. He spread rumors that I was using old Bennett and Company recipes and data, accusing me of trademark infringement. Tabloid articles began to surface, calling me the family traitor or the jealous older brother. Worse, I received notices from tax authorities and product regulators demanding inspections of Bennett Vineworks licenses and production processes. The audits dragged on for weeks, halting production, delaying orders, and piling on financial pressure. I knew without proof that Benson was behind it all. This wasn't just competition. It was a personal war. Some nights I slept at the facility on an old chair, too exhausted to go home, working to fulfill the few orders we had left. I was drained, my eyes sunken, my hands trembling as I inspected each bottle. Financial strain forced me to sell a portion of Bennett Vineworks shares to a small investor, a move that felt like losing a piece of my dream. My small team, Mark, Sarah, and a few others, was my greatest source of strength. They stayed, not for the paycheck, but because they believed in me. "Fabian," Sarah said one day as we inspected a new batch of wine, "you're the real leader. Not Benson, not anyone else. You." Her words were like medicine, giving me the will to keep going despite my weary legs. After nearly 6 months of perseverance, a small ray of light broke through the storm. A local restaurant chain agreed to distribute Bennett Vineworks wine. They tasted Renly Reserve, the organic wine I named in honor of my grandmother, and they loved it. For the first time in months, I smiled genuinely, my heart a little lighter. This small success caught the attention of the local media. An article in the Napa Valley Register called me the betrayed man rising from the ashes. My story, from fired COO to an entrepreneur chasing an organic wine dream, spread, and Renly Reserve became a symbol of quality and resilience. But this success also ignited Benson's fury. He launched a new smear campaign, hiring bloggers and small publications to claim I was riding the Bennett brand for fame. One article even called me a recipe thief, suggesting I'd stolen trade secrets from Bennett and Company. I read those words, my blood boiling, but I held back. Many urged me to sue Benson or speak out publicly to defend my honor. "You can't let them slander you like this," Mark said, his voice thick with anger. But I shook my head. "Our actions will speak for us," I replied. "If I sue, it'll only prolong the drama." I want them to see Bennett Vineworks stand tall, not because of words, but because of quality. I focused on every detail, overseeing each bottle, each vine, ensuring every Bennett Vineworks product was perfect. I believed that kindness and dedication would outlast Benson's lies, and deep down I knew one thing. The more fiercely he attacked, the more it proved I was on the right path. Every slander, every audit, every canceled order only fueled my resolve. I wasn't fighting to bring him down. I was fighting to prove that I, Fabian Bennett, was more than just a name in the family. I was the bearer of my grandparents' true legacy. Nearly 2 years have passed since I received my grandmother Renly's trust fund, and every day has been a battle. Bennett Vineworks, the small company I built from the ashes, has begun to take root. Our organic wines, especially Renly Reserve, have been warmly embraced by local restaurants and true wine enthusiasts. But my victory isn't just in the numbers on revenue reports. It's the affirmation that I wasn't defeated, that I could rise again even when the world turned its back on me. Meanwhile, Bennett & Company, the company that was once my pride, is sinking into crisis under Benson's leadership. The contrast between the two companies couldn't be starker. On one side is Bennett & Company with its glamorous offices and expensive advertising campaigns, but riddled with financial chaos and impulsive decisions. On the other is Bennett Vineworks, small, modest, but resilient, honest, and steadily growing. Every bottle we produce is a declaration. Quality and dedication will always triumph over vanity. I've heard rumors about Bennett & Company through the press and old friends. Revenue has plummeted, major partners have pulled out, and employees continue to leave. Benson's high-risk real estate ventures have failed, leaving behind massive debts. He tried to mask it with lavish advertising campaigns, but the truth can't be hidden forever. One morning, I opened the Napa Valley Register and saw a bold headline: "Crisis at Bennett & Company, Family Legacy on the Brink of Collapse." The article detailed Benson's mismanagement, his extravagant spending on cars, yachts, and unnecessary parties. I read it, but I didn't feel vindicated. Instead, a deep sadness settled in. This was once my company, my grandfather's, my family's. Now it's just an empty shell. My father, Cason Bennett, finally realized his mistake. I started receiving messages from him, short, pleading texts. "Fabian, we need to talk. Son, meet with me." But I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every time I saw his name on my phone screen, I remembered his indifferent gaze when I was fired, when I questioned him about Benson. I sent one reply: "You know what led the company to this point." Then I turned off my phone, unwilling to hear his excuses. Cason began facing pressure from investors and the media. The Bennett family's reputation plummeted. Veronica, as usual, tried to pin the blame on me. She appeared on a local talk show, her sharp smile and dramatic tone in full display, claiming I had betrayed the family by starting Bennett Vineworks to compete with Bennett & Company. "Fabian was always jealous of his brother," she said, her eyes gleaming like an actress on stage. But the public wasn't fooled. The evidence, from financial reports to former employees' testimonies, pointed to Benson's incompetence. Veronica could manipulate my father, but she couldn't manipulate all of Napa Valley. I stayed silent. The press repeatedly reached out, wanting to interview me about the Bennett family feud, but I declined every offer. I didn't want to turn my story into a cheap drama. Instead, I focused on Bennett Vineworks, on the quality of our products. I launched a new wine line, Noah's Legacy, in honor of my grandfather. Each bottle was a perfect blend of tradition and innovation. My grandfather's handcrafted methods combined with modern technology. When the first bottles of Noah's Legacy hit the market, they sparked a sensation. Restaurants, hotels, and even some international distributors took notice. An article in Wine Spectator called Noah's Legacy, a symbol of tradition and innovation coexisting. I read it, my heart pounding. Not with pride, but with the knowledge that my grandfather somewhere was smiling. Bennett Vineworks' success wasn't just a personal victory. It was a declaration that I, Fabian Bennett, was the true Bennett, as the press began to call me. International investors reached out proposing partnerships to export our wine to Europe and Asia. I received calls from Italy, France, Japan, places I'd once dreamed of bringing the Bennett name to when I was at Bennett and Company. Each new contract, each compliment from a client was a brick in the foundation of my new legacy. But I remained humble, never mentioning Benson or my father in conversations. I wanted my actions to speak, not my words. Meanwhile, Bennett and Company entered an inevitable collapse. An independent audit was conducted and the truth was shocking. Benson had manipulated finances, falsified profit reports, and used company funds for personal expenses. He'd spent millions on cars, lavish vacations, and even a Miami condo no one knew about. Shareholders were furious, demanding his removal as CEO. An emergency meeting was held and Benson was replaced by an interim director, an outsider hired to salvage what remained. I heard the news through an old friend, but I didn't feel joy. Instead, I felt regret for the company, for the legacy, and for Benson, who had dug his own grave. Many of Bennett and Company's former clients began turning to Bennett Wineworks. They called saying they wanted to work with someone who truly understands wine. Each new contract was an indirect but powerful counterstrike against Benson. I didn't need to speak out or sue. The market chose me, not because I was Benson's brother, but because I offered quality, sincerity, and a trustworthy story. One evening, as I was inspecting a new batch of wine at the facility, my phone buzzed. It was Benson. I stared at his name on the screen, my finger hovering over the decline button. He called again and again, leaving long, pleading voicemails. "Fabian, brother, we need to talk. I know I messed up. Help me?" I listened, but didn't reply. Not because I was gloating, but because I had nothing left to say. Benson had his chance, and he chose his path. Now I wanted to focus on mine. But deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. Benson may have fallen, but my father, Kaysen, was still there, and he wouldn't let go easily. I looked out the window, the moonlight illuminating the vineyards, and told myself, "Come what may, Dad, I'm ready." That fateful afternoon arrived on a day of gentle sunlight, when golden rays streamed through the windows of Bennett Wineworks headquarters. I was inspecting a new batch of wine when Sarah, my assistant, knocked on the door. "Fabian," she said, her voice tinged with tension, "you have visitors. It's your father and Benson." The meeting room door opened and they walked in. My father, Kaysen Bennett, still carried the polished demeanor of a corporate chairman, but I noticed the weariness in his eyes. His silver hair was more disheveled than usual, and his shoulders slumped slightly as if the weight of his mistakes pressed down on him. Beside him was Benson, his face pale, eyes fixed on the floor, devoid of the smugness he wore the day he fired me. They stood there in the modest meeting room of Bennett Wineworks, a far cry from the luxurious leather chairs and crystal chandeliers of Bennett and Company. Here there was only an old wooden table, a few chairs, and a photo of my grandparents on the wall, a reminder of the true legacy. "Fabian," my father began, his voice trembling, lacking its former authority. "Thank you for agreeing to meet us." I nodded, saying nothing, my gaze cold but composed. I pulled out a chair, gesturing for them to sit. The air was thick with tension, each passing second heavy with the promise of a storm about to break. Benson sat silently, hands clasped tightly in his lap, unable to meet my eyes. My father cleared his throat, trying to regain his composure, but I saw the desperation in his expression. "Fabian," he continued, "Bennett and Company is in trouble. The shareholders have removed Benson and the company. It's on the brink of bankruptcy. We need you. We need you to save the family legacy." I stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the Napa Valley vineyards. "Dad," I said, my voice even but icy, "you chose Benson. You said he was the future of Bennett and Company. Now you're here asking me to save the company you let him destroy. How do you think I feel?" My father bowed his head, his hands trembling on the table. "Fabian, I was wrong," he said, his voice nearly a whisper. "I let Veronica manipulate me, let emotions cloud my judgment. But you're my son. You're the only one who can save the company." "I'll save it," I said firmly, making them both look up at me. "But not for you and not for you, Benson. I'll do it for Grandpa, for Grandma, for what they built. But I have conditions." My father frowned, his eyes wary. "What conditions?" he asked. I stepped back to the table, placing my hands on the wood, looking straight into his eyes. "I'll merge Bennett and Company into Bennett Vineworks, creating a unified corporation. I'll take full control of operations, restructure the company, and save it from bankruptcy. In return, you transfer all your shares to me. All of them." The room fell into a deafening silence. My father's jaw dropped, his face paling as if he'd been slapped. "Fabian," he stammered, You! This is the family's company." "Family?" I shot back, my voice like ice. "The family that fired me turned its back on me, let Benson destroy Grandpa's legacy. I'm not doing this for revenge, Dad. I'm doing it to restore what this family was meant to stand for, not hollow prestige, but real value." Benson shot up, his face flushed with anger. "You're exploiting this to take everything," he shouted, pointing at me. "You have no right. Bennett and Company belongs to the whole family, not just you." He started to say more, but my father raised a hand to stop him. He looked at me, then at Benson, and I saw the struggle in his eyes. Finally, he sighed, as if all strength had left him. "All right, Fabian," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll sign." The signing took place in heavy silence. Mr. Collins, my lawyer, brought the share transfer documents. My father took the pen, his hand trembling, and signed his name. Benson sat there, head bowed, silent. I stood tall, watching him sign, but there was no joy in me, only a strange emptiness. After the signing, I stood and spoke, my voice resonating in the room. "As of today, I announce the formation of Bennett Group Holdings, a new corporation combining my grandparents' traditional legacy with modern vision." I looked at my father, then at Benson. "Benson, you will be removed from the board. Dad, you'll hold an honorary advisory role, but with no authority. This is your chance to make amends." In silence. My father nodded, his eyes misty with tears, but he said nothing. Benson stood and stormed out, slamming the door without looking back. I heard the sound but felt nothing but relief. Veronica, as usual, was absent. After the meeting, she sent a letter proposing reconciliation, but I didn't open it. I had no need for her hollow words. The sunset cast a radiant golden glow over the Napa Valley vineyards, streaming through the windows of Bennett Group Holdings' office. I sat down, placing the photo of my grandparents on the desk, and gazed at my grandmother Renly's smile. She was the only one who believed in me when the world turned its back. When my father chose Benson, when Veronica manipulated everything, when I was fired and lost it all. Her letter, with its slanted handwriting, still lay in my desk drawer, a small flame guiding me through the darkest days. "Live, Fabian, and live well," she had written. And now, as Bennett Group Holdings emerged from the merger of Bennett and Company and Bennett Vineworks, I knew I was honoring her words. But this journey wasn't just about rebuilding a company. It was about rediscovering myself, about learning what family, forgiveness, and true success really mean. True success, I realized, doesn't come from defeating others. I didn't need to bring down Benson or shame my father to feel accomplished. Success was standing in the winery, watching barrels of Renly Reserve being packed, hearing the laughter of my small but loyal team. Success was a call from a San Francisco restaurant saying their customers loved the story behind my wine. Success was an email from a distributor in Tuscany proposing to bring Noah's legacy to Italy, where my mother Elena ran her small cafe. Success was staying true to the right values even when everything around me crumbled. Bennett Group Holdings to me wasn't just a business triumph. It was a triumph of dignity. When I announced the formation of the new corporation in the modest meeting room of Bennett Vineworks, I wasn't just merging two companies. I was merging two parts of myself, Fabian of the past, who sacrificed everything for Bennett and Company, and Fabian of the present, who learned to rise from the ashes. Every bottle bearing the Bennett Group Holdings name was a reminder that I had overcome the darkest days, that I hadn't let the past define me. The past, with my father's broken promises, with Benson's betrayal, was part of me, but it wasn't all of me. How I stood up, how I rebuilt, that's what defined who I am. I remembered my mother's words. Don't expect recognition from others, Fabian. Do what's right and time will prove you. She was right. I didn't need my father's proud gaze, Benson's apology, or Veronica's admission of fault. I had proven my worth through the wines, the contracts, the people who believed in me. Sarah, Mark, the small team at Bennett Vineworks. They were my true family, not because of blood, but because they understood and respected what I stood for. I held the photo of my grandparents, gently tracing Renly's face. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Thank you for believing in me." She had foreseen it all. The betrayal, the collapse, and my resurgence. The $5 million trust wasn't just money, it was her faith, her message that I could do it even when no one else believed. And I hadn't let her down. Bennett Group Holdings wasn't just my company. It was my grandparents' legacy, built on integrity, resilience, and love. I stepped out of the office, locked the door, and drove home. The familiar road wound through the vineyards, the scent of earth and ripe grapes drifting through the open window. I thought of my mother, her small cafe in Florence, and promised myself I'd visit her soon. I thought of my grandparents, the first vines they planted, their love for this land. And I thought of myself, Fabian Bennett, who had lost everything but found so much more. Under Napa's star-filled sky, I knew I had lived as Renly urged. To live, and live well. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove it to myself. And that, I knew,